Here's a good question. You just mentioned on hold. Can you describe to our audience what that means? What does it mean when a song is put on hold?
What it means in essence is that whoever's asking for the hold, whether it be an artist himself or herself, producer, A&R person, which is artist and repertoire,
Hmm.
if they call the publishing company and say, hey, we want to put this song on hold, it means you, as the owner of that copyright, cannot, or it's not a cannot, it's not a black and white, you're going to honor that hold, meaning you're not going to pitch it to somebody else until they decide whether or not they're going to record the song. So it's kind of like they're putting it over here, like, okay, we can pretty much count on we're going to be able to record this song, and it's not going to be pitched to somebody else, and they're going to beat us to the punch, so to speak.
So
Now, there's
essentially,
so many,
it's a handshake agreement, basically. Then, yeah.
basically, and I watched a lot of things play out. Friends in Low Places, for instance. When that came in, I was there. I took the reel to reel tape from Dwayne Blackwell, who was one of the writers, and I put it through the machine, and we listened to it for the first time at BMG Publishing. First time we heard Friends in Low Places
Wow,
demo,
that's crazy.
and it was Garth singing the demo,
Wow,
and he didn't record it on his first album, but it was
wow.
on hold. It was on hold, and so Dwayne was pretty mad about it. So I remember sitting in the front office at BMG, and our song plugger and the VP of BMG were talking, and I'm just sitting there privy to the whole conversation. And the plugger had taken it over to Mark Wright, who was producing Mark Chestnut over at RCA. Well, I think Mark was on MTA, but Chestnut was on MTA, but Mark Wright was an A&R at RCA, but was still producing it.
Hmm.
And them discussing, can we let them cut it on Mark Chestnut, because it was on hold for Garth. But Dwayne was given the option when Henry asked him, and he said, "Let him cut it," because he was mad that they didn't put it on the first record. So there was a big controversy over that hold. Um, I watched it happen a handful of times. I've got a funny story about the Kenny Rogers "Someone Is Me." It was on hold for Kenny through his manager.
Hmm.
His manager had played it for Kenny, and Kenny loved the song. He said, "Put it on hold." So my publisher did. So my publisher had a meeting with the producer, Dan Huff's assistant. Dan Huff is one of the big Nashville producers, used to be an LA session person. Anyway, he had a meeting with him, and he said, "Oh, no, we're not cutting that song. We're not cutting that." So my publisher, being told that information, said, "Okay, so it's no longer on hold if you're not recording it."
Hmm.
So he pitched it to Rory Feek and Tim Johnson, and they cut it on Blaine Larson. So the funny story about that is, and I hope I'm not taking up too much time on this particular story, but it is about holds, is my publisher Dan Hodges called one day and he said, "Hey, I've got some good news and some bad news." I said, "Okay, tell me the bad news first, and maybe the good news will temper it afterwards." So he said, "Well, no, it was just the opposite. I'm sorry." I said, tell me the good news first. Maybe it'll make the bad news not so bad." He said, "Well, the good news is Kenny Rogers did record your song, and it's coming out. It's coming out in 2 weeks." I said, "Great." I said, "Well, what's bad about that?" He said, "Well, the first 200,000 units have the wrong writer's credit in them. So
Oops.
in the, in the in the interim, they had recorded it on Blaine Larson, who was on RCA. So they both came out simultaneously. And the producers of Blaine were really upset. And Dan told a great story about, boy, he got an ear
Hmm.
chewing about that. But it wasn't his fault. And it all went back to the hold situation. The producer's assistant said, "We're not cutting it." So he went ahead and didn't feel like he was violating a hold at that point
Hmm.
because they said they weren't doing it. And there's so many different stories that I've
Man, I might
watched.
get some hate for this, but I liked Blaine Larson's version better. I'm just gonna say
Did
that.
you?
I did.
It was
I
pretty
did.
good. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was pretty good.
I'm kind of a closet Blaine Larson fan anyway. Not a whole lot of people know who Blaine Larson is, but he did a song called I don't know what she said. I don't know if you're familiar with the song.
I don't know that one.
Oh, it's great, man. It tells a story about he's basically in the wrong part of town and he runs into this gorgeous senorita, Latino girl, and she doesn't know any English, and she's talking to him in Spanish, and he says, "I don't know what she said, but I sure like the way that she said it."
I thought you were gonna say I sure like the way it sounded.
Yeah, just a great lyric, man. I mean, I love that.